Say hello to a new friend on an old road. Take a two-lane trip of memories into mysteries unknown. Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim Hinckley's America.
Good morning, my friends. We're going to be heading to Colorado this morning, visiting with a friend of mine, Mary Frances O'Day. It's a nice 30 degrees here in Kingman, Arizona this morning, or as they say in Minnesota, it's a spring morning. Mary, how are you doing this beautiful morning?
I'm great. How are you doing?
You know, it's the damnedest thing. I woke up with a pulse, but I can't find it now.
Well, that's problematic.
You know, I can see where it might be. So, how are things in your neck of the woods?
Oh, we don't have any snow out here. How about you guys? Did you get any of this snow everybody's talking about?
No, we got just a spit and a drizzle. That's all I can say. Enough to spot the windshield.
Yeah, well, in Colorado, that's kind of a concern. I guess you're used to being a little more dry there, but yeah, we've got nothing here. I think we're
No.
like 38 years we haven't had this little snow, so it's kind of weird. But
We've been dry for about 10 years, but the last 2 years, it's been extreme. We're going to be hunting jerky instead of deer. I guarantee you. It's getting bad.
that's actually not funny, is it?
No, not at all. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but when the cactus start to shrivel up and turn black, you might have a problem.
It's not a good sign. It's not a good sign at all. So yeah. But anyway, otherwise can't complain. So,
Speaking of good signs, since we're going to be talking about preservation and things of that nature, you know we got some great new neon signs that have turned up. We're going to be restoring here in Kingman real soon.
No, that's awesome. Where are those?
Uh, uh, Scott Dutton, before he passed, he had the Route 66 Association of Kingman, Arizona, and he's been acquiring neon signs, but he found the old 1953-54 branding iron motel sign in a wrecking yard in Phoenix, Arizona.
That's amazing. That is so cool.
And we got it brought back up here, and restoration hopefully will be ongoing this year.
So that's actually something that I thought about when we were talking about preservation. One of the things that irked me when I started my whole down the mid-century motel road was all the photographs of things falling apart on Route 66. And you
Yeah.
and I both like preservation, but there is such an attraction to this kind of rusty, old, falling apart. Where do you think that line is?
You
You
know
know?
that. Yeah, I do. That's a tough one because it's like Bodie, California. I don't know if you're familiar with Bodie. There's a ghost town out in the Mojave Desert, and the
Okay.
parks, the BLM and Park Service, they preserve it in an arrested state of decay.
Okay.
And there's
That's
something to be
weird.
said for that. If you don't have the money to restore it and the money to put it together, at least keep it from falling apart.
Yeah. Well, and I lived in Leadville, Colorado, which had a
Yeah.
bunch of abandoned mines, and that was kind of the same way. It was, they certainly weren't restoring them by any means, but I don't know though. I hate to see where something could be restored, and I get it. At a certain point, you can't restore things, but where you could, like finding a neon sign in a junkyard, I think it's really cool to bring them back. We have somebody here in Longmont who shall not be named unless you lived in Longmont and knew, who totally ruined a motel sign. Ruined it. Like they painted it where the neon should have been and such. And it just makes me cringe every time I go by it. And it's not letting it decay, but it certainly isn't preserving it either. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
a weird. I get it when people own things, they want to have rights to do what they want with it. But I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, at least if it's covered in paint, at some point it can be restored.
That's
It's
true.
not
That's
it's
true.
not being. And the other part of this is money. This I know our primary focus this morning is going to be on mid-century preservation, but an example of this, the old Indian school. It was put in to quote civilize the Native Americans about 1901, 1902, out in Valentine, Arizona, along Route 66. They did put a roof on it several years ago, and I went through the building. It's in extraordinarily good condition. Even the desks that are bolted to the floor, swivel desks with the blackboards, are all still intact. But what do you do with this?
Right.
It's it's 30 miles from anywhere.
Right.
There's nothing there. It would be a multi-million-dollar renovation. Now what? That's
Yeah.
another question. That's a question
Yeah.
with a
I
lot
don't
of
know.
these properties.
Well, it's true. I mean, I think in Tucumcari, which is really well preserved, there's still a couple of motels there that have not been redone. And I think money factors into it. How many motel rooms a town can support, I get it. It does become an issue, but it's just sad to see them fall apart. And I don't know. It's the line between preservation and money and what is preservation all becomes very fuzzy, And there's, but what is it? It's demolition by neglect.
Yeah.
That I hear quite a bit in preservation worlds where people will buy a property and just kind of let it fall apart so they can demolish it, and that's rough too. I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, Route 66 is a unique animal. If you were to, some of the properties that have been restored on Route 66, if you were to do that on US 6, US 12, US 50, you really should have your head examined. There is zero return on investment, and, it's preservation, but then what? But on
Right.
Route 66, because of the popularity, you can do this. A great example is the Roadrunner Lodge Motel in Tucumcari, New Mexico.
Yes.
Uh, the property has not been fully renovated. The west side, which is a 1940s motel, has not been restored. But what they did in the 1964, they built a new modern two-story motel and adjoined it to the 1940s motel. And Joe Sonderman and I toured that property shortly before David Brennan acquired it. You literally had homeless people living in the rooms. They'd stolen the pipes out of the walls. Uh,
Wow.
and David has invested time and money. It's astounding. He has created an award-winning destination property, and just the attention to detail is extraordinary to create a 1960s time capsule.
Yeah, it's
So
great. Awesome.
it can be done,
It can.
but
But doing it a bit at a time makes a ton of sense. I think that
yeah,
makes a lot of sense. And you and I have already talked about some of these motels. Wagon Wheel was another one where they had to kick out the Boots Motel, where they had to kick out all the homeless people and
yeah.
call the police a lot just to get it cleaned up at all. Um, I don't know. I mean, preservation, does it start with kind of letting people know to not let it get to that point? I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I think, like you say, money plays into it. Where do they start making money that it makes sense to go to all that work?
Well, this ties
I'm
into
sure
your.
David will say it took him a long time to get to that point where that property was making any money.
It's well, I'm sure he. If he was to be 240, I doubt if he'll get a full return on his investment. But
Yeah.
it's ensure primary work. You work so heavily in promotion. I think a big part of this starts at the community level with the city government,
Yep.
uh,
Absolutely.
creating an awareness of the financial benefits. Since the only thing governments really understand is public pressure and money, if you can show them that uh, there's a bigger return on investment with historic preservation than new construction, that's a starting
Right.
point.
Right. Well, I think that's education, right? And education is rough because people have to want to learn about it. and
Yeah.
teaching people. I mean, I know of people who live along Route 66 that still don't even know Route 66 is a thing, and it's probably the most famous highway out there. So, you know, that's an education point that's pretty basic. But if people don't
Yeah.
know they live near, well, you said you didn't, that was kind of a secondary thing in your life, wasn't it? Because you were cars and then Route 66, correct? Or
Well,
did you always know?
yeah, no, Route 66 has been a part of my life since 1959, but
Okay.
and pretty much everything in my life. But for me, it was just an old road. And when the interstate highways started bypassing Route 66 here in Arizona, I still drove Route 66 because I enjoyed it. I knew the people, the barkers at the Truxton Cafe, and I just enjoyed it. And the other part was I was driving a 1946 GMC that had a top speed of 45 miles an hour. So they preferred that I wasn't on the interstate anyway.
Yeah, right. You were more comfortable on the side roads.
Right. So, but they started to overlap, my
Right.
interest in Route 66 and this with the Renaissance period. But your mid-century style magazine does a very good job of education and calling awareness to it sparks the imagination what can be done and the benefits.
I think so. I mean, and it's interesting. I think we've talked about the different generations and how they see these periods. And I don't know if you've run into this a lot, but the younger generation tends to blend the 50s and the 60s, which I think is kind of funny because they're very different style wise. Um, but yeah, I mean, hopefully there's some education and some excitement there when people are looking for answers, trying to find ways to preserve a house that they've just moved into or landscaping. Um, and I do like that some of the younger generations are getting excited about this stuff.
Yeah, I still, and I joke about this a lot, but I still have trouble when people talk about the 50s, 60s, 70s as
One period.
vintage.
Well, in one period too. They all blur it together because now the
Yeah.
80s is cool.
Well, yeah, years ago, a few years ago, almost 10 years ago or so, I was writing for a magazine, and they wanted me to do an article on the first generation minivan as a
Oh, that's
vintage, and this was a vintage car magazine. And I'm
yeah.
thinking, yeah, 1982 Plymouth Voyager. Yeah,
How is that vintage? Well, and they have 80s days at school now, like they used to do
yeah,
50 days when I was in school. So yeah, it is funny. It's kind of a I don't know, but I do get a kick out of blending 50s, 60s, and 70s because in my head, those are very different periods, especially style wise. I mean, the
yeah.
70s really different from the 50s.
Yeah, the 50s were a very unique, especially you get into that like 47, 48 through about 61. It was a very different period with this, the whole space age thing, for one example.
Post-war,
It,
the post-war, the yeah, yeah,
it manifested in the car design, home designs, appliances. Uh, it was a different feel
yep,
during that period, and it's
atomic,
mirrored in everything from
yeah,
cars to houses. You d- you work a lot with historic preservation. Do you lease yourself out as a
yeah,
consultant to
absolutely.
communities? Or,
Well, and then
yeah,
there's the other side. I do love it, and it's
did we lose you there?
interesting to kind of look into these periods. And I was going to say that the French provincial, that's the thing about the 50s that people forget about is they all know the Danish modern, the sleek, the atomic. They don't know like the really busy. You remember the flocked wallpaper and the pinch pleat drapes and the
Yes.
so it's funny how we pick and choose our
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and part of it, a lot of it, of course, is always the driving factor is childhood memories. Is
yes,
is a lot of all preservation from automobiles to furniture,
right,
what
right,
you remember from as a child.
sure,
And
absolutely.
by since I was raised by people who thought the 1890s was a good time, uh, Obviously, my views of things are a little bit skewed. But
Yeah, I mean
what?
that's the yeah, it is interesting. It's interesting what's trendy. I mean, I remember, and I'm sure you do, when Craftsman was really the coolest, and now I think
Yeah,
probably Danish Modern and the sleek Atomic has probably become the coolest retro, but it does vary.
is there? I haven't really found much on this, but is there a movement towards renovating these 1950s suburban ranch houses? Is that a
Oh yeah,
thing?
yeah. There's a
I know you've
couple.
had some articles on you've had some articles on that, and that's how
Yeah,
you got started with this.
it was, yeah. Yeah, because I lived in a blonde brick ranch, which I mean everybody knows. There's a lot of neighborhoods like that. I don't think there's a neighborhood in Denver which I'm now going to entirely forget the name of that is a historic district that is 50s. I don't think it's horribly common. I think the West Coast, I think maybe Palm Springs and some areas of LA have done it, but it's not as common. I think still there are a lot of people like yourself who the 50s and 60s doesn't seem that retro. And I think getting them to, and generally it has to be an architect that's really renowned that designed a whole neighborhood um, that makes it interesting. I'll have to see if I can figure out the name of that neighborhood. But yeah, it's happened. It's not as common as you would think.
I have an extreme fascination with anything, the 50s, the 40s, the 30s. It's just that I have difficult in my mind picturing this as ancient, or and I get drawn up short. I was talking to Dina Nelson, a sponsor of the program here, the State Farm insurance agent that we have, and I told her I was looking for a vintage vehicle to meet with tour groups and for promotion, things of that nature, like a Model A Ford. And she said, "Jim, you do realize you drive a vintage vehicle. I drive a 1998 Jeep Cherokee."
It's true though.
Yeah,
Yeah, when you start doing the math of how old it is. Okay. So the neighborhood is Harvey Park, and it's a
Harvey
Cliff May.
Park. Okay.
It was designed by Cliff May. Athmar Park is another one, but yeah, Harvey Park is a historic district in Denver that is all 50s. Cliff May, Palmer and Chrysler are the developers, and I think like that's the only way. Well, we talked about the what are your houses you found? The
Oh,
all
the
the Yeah,
Lustron
the
homes.
Lustron. I was going to say Lexmar, and I knew that wasn't right. The Lustron homes. That's probably a historic district, isn't it?
You
Out
know,
east.
that's kind of mixed. Those ended up in there was never a subdivision.
Oh, wasn't there?
They were sold and they turn up in weird places. There'll be four in a little town in Ohio. There'll
Oh,
be
how
two
funny.
in New York, and they didn't make very many of those, a couple thousand. But that has led me to question what other companies built houses prefab like that during that period.
I wondered about that too. Yeah, yeah. Well, and we're starting to get back to that, right? With the conversion
Yeah.
of like train cars and things like that for some. It's an interesting movement. The prefab and now 3D printing has pulled that sort of thing into favor again, I guess is the best way to put it. But it's interesting.
This 3D printing of homes. I was watching a program on that recently. That is extremely fascinating. And it really reminds me of the innovations they were trying in the 50s to streamline home construction.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it was putting everybody in a house with a car in it, right? It was the American dream. So you
Yeah.
were trying to find cheap ways to make sure everybody had a house and had the white picket fence, as it were.
The new American dream. Everybody has a car that is also their home. Anyway, that's another story for another day. Uh, on this preservation situation, how sometimes you mentioned people, communities, Route 66 communities. There's people and communities they're scrambling for ways to revitalize their community, and they're looking at casinos and all kinds of different things. And here's Route 66 running through the center of town, and they have these beautiful old buildings, and they don't get it. How do you wake people up to the potential?
I think probably people who do preserve buildings help. I think, I don't know. I think we've talked about, I have a property in Missouri that is not fancy, that I don't think that town understands even fixing things up. In their mind, you just demolish them and start over. And
Yeah.
um, I think that has been the mindset, like new is better for a long time. I think the younger generations, and this is where this can continue, is the younger generations like thrift stores and repurposing. And I think you start to teach people that you can fix things up
Hmm.
and it can be cost effective. And I think that's
Yes.
the connection, is the this doesn't have to cost more money to fix something up and make it look cool, and that it does look cool to have something old become new again.
I attended a conference a few years ago, the World Monuments Fund, and they were presenting facts and figures on how historic preservation, repurposing an old building, maintaining its architectural historic integrity, and then restoration of the building is more cost effective return on investment than new construction.
Yep. Yeah, but I think that's hard for people
Yeah.
because in Longmont, we just had a situation with a building that had an old foundation, and the new contractors that bought the property just could not wrap their head around leaving that foundation. It was irreparable in their head. And I think, and these are professionals. These are not
Uh,
people who are just, buying a house and fixing it up. These are people who do this, but they do new construction for a living. And in their head, the new construction foundation was so superior to fixing anything, and getting them to make that mental jump was just too hard. People see a rundown building and that's all they see.
Yeah, one of the challenges I imagine, and I see this a bit, we've run into a couple here in Kingman, uh, construction. You mentioned the foundation. Some of these old buildings were put up and by people who definitely weren't engineers, and
True.
as a result, um, salvage becomes an issue. We had a gentleman here, a fellow I work with, registered contractors fellow, and he bought a house in the old section of Kingman, and it was a fascinating construction method, well worth preserving. But how do you preserve it? And number two, then what? What the short version is, somebody had poured a foundation. It started out probably as a 1920s two-room house. After World War II, they kept building on it. And what they would do is pour footings. They would put in your floor joist in your floor, but for walls, they took wooden ammunition crates from the Kingman Army Airfield. They cut the bottoms out and they put rebar in all four corners to keep the boxes square. Then they just filled them
Huh.
with rocks, with spark plugs, with broken glass, beer bottles, and packed it in. On the inside, they put up furring strips and paneling. On the outside, they put up chicken wire and stucco. Now what? And that's, but you can find these, the Painted Desert Trading Post. They had a co op that restored that building recently. And I really didn't think that was going to be salvageable.
Sorry, I lost you for just a couple of seconds there. My Wi-Fi dropped out. But that actually sounds like kind of a cool time capsule, though. Don't you kind of want to pull it apart and see all that stuff that's in the
Oh yeah. Well, he bought it, was going to renovate it as a rental property, and he started stripping the walls. And now what? I mean, how do you do this? Are you
Yeah.
familiar with the Painted Desert Trading Post?
No.
Rest,
Oh, I
rest,
do know of it. I know of it. I don't think I've been there. Yeah.
I was glad that they co-op of Route 66 enthusiasts, Rich Dinkla, Dries Bessels, from a whole group. This is a really fascinating place. but it was always remote. It never even had electricity. And the highway that it's on, Route 66 section, was bypassed in the mid 50s. It's a 1940s trading post. The foundation had collapsed on one side. Cows were literally walking through the building. And they managed, through volunteer help, to jack the building up, put a foundation, and redo this to give it an original appearance. So it is possible, but sometimes
Absolutely.
you gotta ask the question: just because we can, should we?
Right. I get that. I think, well, and preservation is definitely that question, right? It's how important is this to you to preserve this? I think Route 66 does have the benefit of some fans and some followers and people who care, which I think is great. I think towns who educate people about kind of preserving what that town looked like through the years, and you have to do through the years, right? Because as you mentioned, some people think the turn of the century, the turn of the previous century was important. Some people think the 30s were important. Some people think, and so preserving bits of all these different eras to kind of see the passage of time, it's a challenge. It definitely is a challenge.
That sparked a thought. We've got a section here in Kingman along Route 66, the Hotel Beale, and down this direction. But I see this a lot in communities where in the 40s and 50s, to give their community a more modern look, they put 40s or 50s style facade over a late 19th century, early 20th century facade. You know,
Yeah, I think that happened a lot. Yeah.
yeah. So then the question becomes, what do you preserve?
Right. Right. Do you go all the way back to, well, and that's the first house I ever owned was a sort of a 30s craftsman that had been quote unquote updated to look 50s. But then in the middle of the house was knob and tube wiring, which clearly predated the 50, so it is interesting. What do you preserve? Do you rip it all the way back? I don't know. I think you go with whatever the best example is. And that's obviously very, um, that can be a judgment call, correct? I mean,
Yeah.
again, in Longmont here, we had a teeny tiny little Victorian, which now our land is so expensive that having a teeny tiny Victorian that you've preserved on a property is not, it's not a good idea. You want a bigger house there, but how do you preserve that it was Victorian in a
Mhm.
new house that fits the property and fits the economy? It does become an issue. Here our guideline is that you have to keep the facade, um, which
Hmm.
isn't much.
Well, the Hotel Beale is an example. The 1950s facade that was overlaid could be preserved. It's a little rough. They had to take the awning down. They had a aluminum awning that had been trimmed in neon that had been added to the front. Uh, that kind of ceramic tile had been laid over the front, and but behind it is the authentic ornate cast iron pillars, the original lead glass windows. So, which one?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, and that's one of the funniest things is talking to people who are into preservation. Some of the best neighborhoods to preserve are the ones that economically were challenged because people just boarded up beautiful windows like that, and yet they're still there. So
Yeah.
they just threw boards over them. They didn't ever update properties. It's where you get into nicer neighborhoods where people have updated things where there's no going back. They've
Right.
done a nice job of the next step up, and you're not going to rip all that off to go back to where it was.
Yeah, you mentioned that Victorian there in Longmont, Colorado. This is another issue, especially I've seen a lot. Southern California, I was just there recently. Uh, Land values, where the land is so valuable, that even a beautiful building from the 1950s, like the Safari Inn in Burbank, 1957, that one's been preserved. But there's a couple motels from the mid 1950s that are just perfect time capsules.
Yeah.
But the land value is such that those properties are going to be lost very soon because developers are wanting it.
Right, right. You're talking either a single story or even a double story motel where they could put up some huge
Apartment
something that would
complex.
make a whole lot more money. Right,
Yeah.
right. And this is where money becomes a real problem with these places. And is there a way to preserve the concept and yet get that increased build? It becomes very difficult. I think it's a really interesting balancing act. I mean, here we struggle with affordable housing. How do you take a historic building and somehow use it for affordable housing? And that
Yeah.
becomes a huge problem because by the time you've preserved it and somebody's put a lot of money into it, they want to sell it for a lot of money, not turn it into cheap housing.
Yeah. The Route 66 Centennial, especially for Route 66 communities, this is a real opportunity. And there is a growing awareness. Tulsa is a perfect example. Those folks are, I mean, they're going to, I'm just amazed uh, by the awakening in Tulsa. Those folks are selling everything on the hog, including the squeal. And they're getting this thing going.
That's a great phrase. I got to remember that.
They're repurposing some buildings. If you get a chance and you look online, a great example is Mother Road Market, one block off Route 66. It was a shipping center, basically a warehousing facility and shipping center. They've preserved all the exterior historic integrity and created a just a real fascinating uh, community development food court situation where people they want to start a restaurant, but they don't have the capital. They can start out small,
Okay.
test the things, and it's a real interesting blending. Professor Nolan Stoltz had an interesting point. He said there's a bigger sociological concern with preservation. Many people they don't want to be reminded of the pre-civil rights era. I hadn't really thought of it from that perspective that people don't want to be reminded of the past.
Huh. Yeah, I ran into that. So Oklahoma in the Panhandle is Boise City, Oklahoma.
Yes, I know the place. Mhm.
I love Boise City. It's really funny. I when I visited, I had a guy there tell me, "Whatever made you come here?" But they've got a cool little museum that the main building was actually designed by a well-known 50s architect whose name has escaped me right now. Um, but they're interesting because they have probably the only really good memorabilia from the Dust Bowl, which if you dig into Dodge City and places like that, they don't want to remember the Dust Bowl because it was something that they were kind of all blamed for. You know, it was basically a, oh, those dumb farmers concept. And so they ignore it to a large degree. So when, who's the really well known historic documentarian whose name is
Ken Burns.
Yes, when Ken Burns did the big Dust Bowl series, they used that museum at in Boise City because they had like boxes of dust from the Dust Bowl and really cool pictures and probably the only memorabilia that existed because of that sort of a thing. Because why would you want to remember a period that was really terrible?
Yeah, I had several conversations about this, like with Candace Taylor. She wrote the book Overground Railroad about the Great American Road Trip from an African American perspective. And she really, there was some discussion, but I really credit her for igniting a serious conversation about this era and preservation specifically of properties in the Green Book for the Negro Motorist.
Yeah, yeah. Which again, I think there's a lot of people that would like to just not remember that period. I think probably the same would be true of Japanese internment camps.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
things that we'd rather just not remember.
Right. Yeah.
Um, Yeah, it's interesting. It is an interesting period. I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, you're right, and that does become an issue. I know there've been a few good documentaries on different African American owned properties that fell into disrepair. Um,
Uh,
so yeah, it's interesting.
we've got an interesting situation. Funding monies have always been a problem with this when it comes to historic preservation. Are you finding? It's and this is not. I'm trying not getting into the political weeds here,
Sure.
but grants and federal funding have shifted. It seems priorities. Are you encountering issues with funding for these projects that you didn't have before?
Um, some, yeah. Well, I think generally right now, I don't think it's a priority in some circles. So I think our, again, not going political, but the Capitol is a good, it's the make it bigger and better rather than the keep it the way it was concept. And again, without politics being involved, this is always a fight.
Yeah,
Correct? Is the, what's more important, making something bigger and better and in some ways more functional, or is it preserving what's been there and keeping the history? And I think right now we're having a problem with keeping the history, I think, in general.
yeah,
um, and I think that's an issue. I think the money's still there. I think a lot, again, it's an education piece. A lot of people don't know that they can get money to
yeah.
keep their houses from falling into disrepair and to try to preserve the way it used to look.
Hmm. Yeah, the educational component, that's something else that needs to. I wish there was a better resource, a centralized resource for this. So if people did want to look for funding to try to preserve, they would know where to go because they get
True.
exasperated, frustrated, and can't turn.
Well, and
The
government sites will never be easy to navigate. It's just the
no,
way things are. They're
yeah,
supposed to be, but they aren't.
no, not at all. In trying to strike find a happy medium. And I'm not talking about a gypsy with a new crystal ball. I'm talking about a happy medium where you have a balance here. Uh, that's always a challenge. Trying to strike that balance besides what's good for the property owner, what's good for the community, and what's good for and necessary for preservation from a cultural perspective.
It's true. Well, and a lot of people, and understandably, a lot of people are like, I don't think that's my responsibility to make my property look the way you want it to.
Right.
And balancing that with you're right, the education component, that's been something that since I've been on a historic preservation commission, it's hard to figure out how to reach out to the community and say, hey, this is what you like. One of the bloggers, and I don't know if she's still blogging, but her whole thing was love the house you're in.
Right.
And rather than buying a house and saying, hey, I want to take this 1970s house and make it look craftsman, or I want to take a 30s house and make it look 50s or something, maybe taking your house and making it look like what it was supposed to look like,
Yeah.
um, is an interesting curve. Love the pink bathrooms was her other thing, which I thought was really funny because there was a period where everybody was ripping those out, and then it got a little more in vogue to try to
Right.
restore them the way they were. Retro renovation is the blog, and yeah, I think she's still going.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I look at this from a car perspective. The reason I drive this old Jeep Cherokee is same reason, and I live in a 1966 house. Is it's cheaper to keep this one from falling down than it is to buy a new one.
Well, it's true. Well, and being a car guy, you know that the newer cars, you've got computers and all sorts of things, and sometimes they're meant to fall apart and be replaced, not be restored. Whereas the
Yeah,
old one, really, the restorations. I had an old Bug that I kept going as long as I could, but yeah, it's and it depends on how popular they are. Jeeps are popular, Bugs are popular. You can find replacement parts for them,
yeah.
but it becomes harder and harder.
One of the things too, with when you start getting into an older house, even if it's structurally sound, is the infrastructure, the plumbing and the
Yep,
electrical. It can be a
yep,
real issue.
yep. It can. And I think things like that, that's where people get into the money pit thing, right? Where it's just
Yeah.
one thing after another. And I know from our house in Missouri, I learned all about septic tanks and had no interest in knowing all of that. But yeah, you become an expert all of a sudden in all sorts of things.
That's a crappy subject. I uh, I ran into a situation when my mother passed, trying to get her house ready to sell. It turned into a real interesting endeavor. The short version of a long story. Uh, the house was really interesting. It was very small. It was 800 square foot, but it had originally been the post office in Chloride, Arizona,
Okay.
and it was all metal. All the interior and exterior door frames and window frames were metal. Well, I started running into all kinds of problems as I tried to sell this place and get it cleaned up to sell. The gentleman who had bought it had been a surveyor here for decades, and he had been a property developer, buy or sell. And my mom's house was on Chestnut Street, but he owned the house behind it on Walnut Street. So when he moved the house in and set it up on Chestnut Street, instead of hooking it up to the sewer on Chestnut Street, he simply hooked it up to the sewer in the house behind it.
Oh,
So,
that's crazy.
and then I found out all the under the drywall that had been installed in the ceiling. Underneath that was all asbestos tiles from like the 1950s.
Of
And
course.
then the electrical life was all sold. It was glass fuses, and
Uh,
none of the outlets even had places for grounded plugs. And from there it went downhill.
I was going to say I laugh, but that's actually not funny because yeah, there wasn't any code. I mean, that's back in the days where you didn't even try.
Yeah, especially that's a problem in a lot of these small towns.
Yeah,
You know,
I think the
where
hooking the plumbing to the house next door, that's hilarious.
yeah, that was because the Chestnut Street sets up on a hill and Walnut's way below. So he just hooked this sewage up to the house that he owned behind it, and then ran both houses into the city sewer on Walnut Street and just
Which
said
made a ton
Chestnut.
of sense at the time, and I'm sure he'd never crossed his mind, what if I ever sell one of these?
Yeah, and then I found out the driveway on side. This was another problem. I found out the footprint for the property was so small that if it burned, I couldn't even build on the site anymore because the property the lot size was so small.
So small. Huh.
Yeah, the driveway on the side of the house actually was part of Ascara's property next door. And at some point, the Ascara family had just had a handshake agreement. Yeah, we'll move our fence. Go ahead and put your driveway there.
Well, that's I have a friend who has a historic home in Palisade, and they were trying to do something along their property line and realized all the property lines on their entire block were like several feet off.
Oh, God.
And so they had to hire a lawyer to go through and kind of help them basically redraw the whole block because it was all, and again, it was all handshake deals, right? It was oh,
Uh,
sure, you can put your flower bed in there. Oh, that's fine. Your driveway can be this much farther over. And it is interesting. I believe there's some rules where if something's like that for a period of time, you can just say it's part of the property, but still it gets ugly.
I've really gotten myself into some deep weeds working with Kingman Main Street. I've been doing this Kingman Tours project. It's www.kingman.tours. It's a narrated, self-guided historic district walking tour, and I've done the research and narration and trying to find the history on these buildings. And this is Kingman is the Mojave County seat, and I realize when you get into the territorial era, tracking down the history of a building can be a challenge. But
Right.
I am astounded trying to get the history of commercial buildings that were built in the 1950s, and nobody knows. There's no records.
Yeah.
There's no building permits. There's no. That was put up sometime, I think it was 1952. And then you talk to the fellow's daughter, and she goes, "Well, I didn't think he built that till 1958."
Right,
And
right.
the county shows it wasn't there until 1960.
Because it's possible that was when the permit was pulled, right? I mean, like maybe they did a bunch of work and then pulled the permit several years later. Again, some gentleman's agreement. Oh, Bob, you should probably get a permit for that.
Well, one property I still haven't deciphered is Canada Mart Complex on Route 66. Uh, it started out as a gift shop that Charlie McCarthy built for his wife, and then he built a gas station next to that. And his wife lost interest in the gift shop, so he turned it into, of all things, a Studebaker, International Harvester, and Mercedes dealership.
What the fuck?
And he was Kingman's second mayor. So you would think there'd be some records, but the best I've been able to determine is this was all built between 52 and 56. That's the best I can come up with. I've
Which
tracked
is
down his
a fairly
I've, tra-
small window, but
I've tracked down his daughter, and uh, even crazier. There's another building on that property that was the Dairy Queen when I was a kid. It was Dairy Queen for years, and I found out that was from the Kingman Army Airfield, had been moved in and used as tire storage, and then turned into a Dairy Queen. And sometime between 1948 and 1960.
so even the structures were kept and turned into a Dairy Queen because usually like Dairy Queen would
Yeah,
have just demoed it and started over, but they didn't. They just used something.
no, yeah, yeah. And that's another interesting thing here in Kingman, and you'll probably find this in places too, is buildings that were relocated and repurposed.
Yeah. And I mean, talk about something that would be too expensive to do now. But yes, I think that happened quite a bit because you could just, and they wouldn't do it according to any of our standards now. I'm sure they threw it on the back of a truck or took a couple of trucks and moved things. And
We have one here that, Mary, when you get back down here, I got to show you a few of these things. The American Legion Hall here in Kingman is actually two buildings. It's the base theater from the Kingman Army Airfield, and it's the Officers Club. And they brought both buildings in, like you said, on a flatbed truck, and tied them together. I got a great picture. It's talking about pre-OSHA. There's a picture going down Route 66 through Kingman. This two-story building on the back of this massive homemade flatbed, and I think drinking was involved. There's a fella on top with a 2x4 cross member pushing power lines out of the way when they go down the street.
oh my gosh, can you imagine? That's so funny. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's where, and again, you got to think about foundations of those buildings and stuff. I'm sure they're fine is the thing. And that's I'm sure how long has it stood where it is now? Since the 50s
Since
or
about 49, 50, yeah. Mhm.
and that's, now we would consider that completely unacceptable, but that's kind of awesome. That's really funny.
You all have. I know you keep a very busy schedule, but if a community was looking for a preservation consultant, would you be up for something like that? If somebody
I would
reached
love
out to
to.
you?
Yeah, I would love to. It'd be really interesting to kind of help because I do think even in my own uh, community, again, you have a lot of focus on 20s, 30s. 50s tends to get forgotten, and
Yeah.
it is one of those eras where the more education people can have of what things could look like or what preservation looks like. I mean, sadly, you do the math, and those are now, what, 75 years old?
Ooh, thank you.
But it's true. You start thinking 75, 65, 50 years old properties where that's historic at this point. And I think a lot of times people don't think about saving those structures And yeah, I think it's, and I think the other thing is the signage. I mean, there's a movement towards that. And I think your guy that you had on a month or so ago that is doing the sign, the historic sign
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. And Vegas has their sign. That's great. I still like to see them with the businesses personally. I think it's cool. I think it's cool that you guys found some signs and have brought them back, because I do think preserving those, although neon restoration is again pricey.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got some real interesting projects here, and I know Kingman's not alone in this. We've got a Packard sign that we drug out of a garage and put up back on the front of the garage. I know it wasn't originally there; it was originally on another building. It's about a 1930 Packard sign,
Okay.
and we've been chasing it. We've found out it was about actually at 4 or 5 different buildings,
Huh.
and another one that was really interesting is the Mr. D's sign down at Mr. D's Route 66 Diner. We've been able to find out that that was repurposed. It was originally the Frontier Cafe and Bar sign, Frontier Cafe and Lounge sign. And then we found out that it was repurposed from Richie's Cafe. It was originally a Richie's Cafe sign, and then when Richie's Cafe burned, apparently the owners of the Frontier Cafe got it. They repainted it, did it up for their place, and then it ended up at Mr. D's Route 66 Diner.
So how are you tracking these things down? Do you just do a word of mouth? Is that kind of how?
A word of mouth, postcards, historic photo archives,
Huh.
uh, just anything we can find. But I find Kingman is a very unique animal in a lot of ways, but it's really small town America, and this goes back to the 1950s. In small town America in the 1950s, you did things like this. You
Yeah.
repurposed stuff.
Sure.
You turned it into something that looked space age, even though it was built in the 1930s.
Right, right. Which again begs your question: do you renovate it to the space age, or do you renovate it to the 1930s? It becomes
Yeah,
difficult.
yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, I think finding these things again, that's got to take some time and some boots on the ground, as it were. I'm sure.
Well, a lot of times this stuff just of course with Scott passing kind of put a damper on things. But when we started doing this, we'd put out the word, and through Kingman Tours Project, the website, we would do blog posts and different things, and we would get calls from people that, oh, we're renovating our house. Do you want this B-17 turret? I don't know why my uncle had it in the basement.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah,
You know,
yeah. I get,
and we,
again, it's education and communication, right? I mean, that's how you get out to people and find out things are out there.
uh,
Um, yeah, having a general place for people to comment on things like that, because that is kind of cool.
The Route 66 corridor, that has sparked a lot of great preservation. The Cactus Inn Motel in McLean, Texas. Uh, Angela Moreland's done a great job. That's a really neat 1950s motel. We mentioned David Brenner. The Roadrunner Lodge Motel, and of course the Wagon Wheel Motel.
Right.
Vicky Ashcraft at the Enchanted Trails Trading Post and RV Park has an interesting uh, 1950s collection, shall we say. She has a trading post that was built in the 1940s. When they built the highway, they realigned Route 66 in the mid 50s behind the trading post. At the other side of the property, the owner simply picked up the trading post, took it to the end of the property, and turned it around and gave it a facelift. And she has that, and then she's collects vintage travel trailers and outfits them with period correct accessories for
Oh, I
display.
think those are cool. There's quite a few of those across the country now. That's kind of to your point of people living in travel trailers, but the parked trailer parks are kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah. Mary,
So,
I always enjoy our conversations, and I will when I publish this, I'll provide your contact information. There's a couple communities because of the 250th anniversary and of the United States and the 100th anniversary of Route 66 that are they're starting to seriously talk about preserving what they
Mm-hmm.
have. And so I will provide your contact information when I publish this. But I always enjoy our conversations because you spark my imagination. And judging by some of the comments I get, you get people to thinking. And that can be dangerous, but it can also be the first step towards salvaging some of these things before we lose them.
Well, it is, and I do think there's some, again, this is kind of one of those two sides of a coin, but the amount of these little motels that are places people live, um, again, you can make an argument for affordable housing in communities. I guess they're being preserved. To your point, if it's just painted, you can always turn it back. Um, but I do think sometimes people don't realize that they have something there that could be, um, the Roadrunner Motel. They don't realize they could actually create something that's really cool.
Yeah.
And I think the education on preserving the exteriors and the that kind of period is very cool. There's a lot of neat stuff out there that raising awareness as to what it could be is an interesting challenge.
It takes a very special person to look at a property, realize it's worth preservation, and then taking the next step, investing $1 million to create a very nice $40,000 property.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, it does. Well, that's the labor of love, right? And
Yeah.
that's I think a lot of people who like retro and like preserving the past realize that a lot of these things are maybe not economically as important as they are culturally.
Right. It's like writing, working as a consultant with historic preservation. You don't do it for the money because if you do, that's just not going to work. It's,
You're in trouble.
yeah. So all you're going to get is an excuse for drinking. It's, but yeah, you do it for a labor of love, and you do. You want to make sure that their stuff is here for another generation. And you're right, there is a growing awareness about the 50s, but it's fuzzy. Like you
Mhm.
said, they people have a tendency to see the 50s and 60s as one and the same, and they're
Right.
distinctly different eras.
Oh, very different, and a lot of different design styles, and yeah. So yeah, raising that awareness of what's what, and um, getting people to preserve all of it, not just the bits that they like. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, history is an interesting thing.
Mary, I sure appreciate you taking time to do this today. Uh,
Absolutely, we always
because
find things to talk about.
Oh, I've been told I can talk like this for hours, even if I'm the only one in the room and still enjoy myself. But this really sparks some interest, and I've got projects like this Kingman Tours project. Uh, I want to. I've been offering this. I've been taking this with me on speaking engagements. Sample kiosk. This is a project that could work in any community, and it's really fascinating. This is the only project I've worked on in Kingman where it brought people together. People who have multi generational Hatfield and McCoy relationships, people who are convinced that Main Street organizations are Communist Party getting a front row seat in your community. Uh, all of a sudden, they came together on this project. They worked together, and it fostered a sense of community. It fostered a sense of community purpose, and it brought people together in a commonality. And so it could work in almost any community. But
So, what is it? It's a kiosk.
yeah, it's a virtual tour and a self-guided tour.
Oh, okay.
Not just to our historic sites, but it's also our public art, explaining the public art behind this.
So this is your Kingman tours.
Yeah, Kingman
Okay.
Tours.
Huh.
Yeah,
Interesting. That's very cool.
yeah,
I'll have to
yeah.
take a
If you,
look.
And if anybody's out traveling, like say we mentioned the Enchanted Trails Trading Post, they're it's outside of Albuquerque at the top of 9 Mile Hill. And
Okay.
if you're traveling with an RV, Vicky's got it's a modern, very very full everything you need RV park. Great location, just within. On a windy day, you could spit and hit downtown Albuquerque, but yet you're out in the country a tad bit, so it's nice. But her display of vintage travel trailers is well worth a visit.
I'm just
Speaking of
looking at her
nine,
website, and she's got everything from the 50s through the 70s on the travel
yeah,
trailer. That's kind of cool.
yeah, the
So,
'50s travel trailers. That is another manifestation of that unique '50s optimism about the future made manifest.
absolutely. Well, and it was road trips, right? People
Yeah,
started taking their houses with them.
yeah. Mhm.
So,
Mary, thank you. I won't tie
yeah,
you up this morning, but let's keep this conversation going, and let's see if we can save a few of these things.
I think that sounds great. Yep, I agree. So, awesome. Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, Mary, I enjoy this immensely. Your conversations are always so fascinating.
Well, we'll do it again.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
You too. Bye bye. For my friends, thank you for joining us today. I'll get all the information up about Mary Francis's work as a consultant. I've got a link here for her website. I will have that in the description when I publish this later today. And let's make this a great year. Let's make this is the 250th anniversary of the United States. Let's save a few of these time capsules. Let's give them a new lease on life. Let's repurpose them. Let's find a way to make sure that our kids and grandkids have a tangible link to the past. Consider it a challenge. And we got some great stuff coming up in a few weeks, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. My friends, I want to thank everybody who joined us today, and I sure want to thank everyone who plays such an important role in making the past relevant. Everything from the Enchanted Trails Trading Post and RV Park to the Wagon Wheel Motel and people who are the Main Street organizations that work tirelessly on these things. And, well, we will get together again soon, my friend. So let's inspire a road trip or two after the snow melts. With a little bit of music from Joe and Woody and the boys of the Road Crew. Roadcrew66.com, my friends. Till we meet again, vaya con Dios.
Say hello to a new friend on an old road. Take a 2-lane trip of memories into mysteries unknown. Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim Hinckley's America.